The snow had not stopped in 3 days. It pressed down on the land like a punishment, flattening the fields, muffling the world into silence. Every fence post wore a white cap. Every tree bent beneath its weight. The wind didn't howl, it whispered cruel things through the cracks of the old ranch house, finding its way into the bones. And inside, Levi Dunn sat with his elbows on the table, watching a single flame dance in the oil lamp. The house was cold, even with the fire. He had stacked the last of the seasoned wood that morning, and what remained would be green, hard to burn, full of smoke. He hadn't eaten since yesterday. There was food, of course, but grief had a way of making the body forget what it needed. Her photograph sat by the window, where the frost had spread in delicate lace-like veins. Eliza, gone 3 winters now. Her smile was thin in the picture, cautious, as if even then she had known joy wouldn't last long in this place. He kept the photo turned out, so the house wouldn't feel so empty. But it did. The land didn't care. The snow kept falling. The cattle would need tending in the morning, even if the cold burned his fingers through the gloves. Life went on in the ugliest way it knew how. The letter had arrived 2 weeks prior, buried in catalogs and bills, yellowed, wrinkled at the corners, sent from St. Louis. A mail-order bride service he'd barely remembered signing up for in the haze of last summer. A season of too much whiskey and not enough company. He'd paid $3 for the listing, a laughable price for a woman's life. Her name was Miriam, age 22, no family, willing to travel. Now she was coming. On the eastbound train, he had not written back. Outside, the wind lifted a corner of the barn roof and slammed it back down. A loose shutter knocked against the upstairs window. Somewhere beneath the storm's hush, Levi thought he heard the train whistle cry out against the cold. He closed his eyes. Maybe she'd change her mind. Maybe she wouldn't come. But the sound came again, sharp and low, fading into the night like a promise already broken. The platform was little more than a plank of boards, now half covered in snow. She stood on it like a statue chipped out of frost, her gloved hands clasped tight at her stomach, her face still from the cold. A carpet bag sagged at her feet. Levi hadn't brought the wagon, just the buckskin mare and a saddle blanket. He hadn't expected her to look like that, thin and stiff, cheeks pale from the wind, eyes too dark for such a pale face. She looked like a ghost the snow had spit out. He stopped a few yards away, tugged his hat low over his brow. "You, Miriam?" She nodded once. No tears, no questions, just silence. He reached for her bag, and she let him take it. "You'll ride with me," he said, jerking his head toward the mare. Still no answer. She climbed up behind him without a word, hands light on his waist, like she was afraid she'd fall through him. The ride was quiet. Hooves muffled by snow, wind biting at their clothes. The land rolled out around them, white and brutal. Levi didn't speak. He didn't know how to fill the quiet. She was warm against his back, but light, like someone who hadn't eaten enough in a long time. The house came into view, squat and alone, windows shuttered, chimney dead. He helped her down. "This is it." She gave a small nod, then stepped forward. Her boot crunched through the ice and sank into the snow. Inside, the house seemed even colder now that another soul had stepped into it. Her eyes scanned the room, the table, the fireplace, the stairs. She said nothing. He set the bag down near the stove. "You'll have the upstairs room." Still, no answer. He rubbed the back of his neck. "You hungry? I can cook." The voice startled him. Soft, with the faintest edge of something not quite local back east, maybe Virginia. Not as young as he thought, and not a question. A statement. He nodded and stepped back, unsure what to do with his hands. "I'll get wood." Outside, the snow was falling again, slower now, drifting like ashes across the fields. As he chopped, he watched the smoke start curling from the chimney. She had lit the fire, and for the first time in months, the house no longer looked abandoned. The smell hit him before he stepped inside, onions sweating slow in a cast-iron pan, something warm and heavy curling up from the stove like memory. It made his stomach clench. Not from hunger, though that was there, deep and dull. No, it was something else. A feeling he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. She had her sleeves rolled up, revealing wrists thin as fence wire. Her dress was too light for the cold, a pale green thing already fraying at the hem. But she moved with purpose, silent, careful, like someone used to being watched and judged for every step. "You found flour," he said, surprised. She didn't look up. Bottom of the bin. And lard. Enough for biscuits, I think." He didn't answer. Just stood there, the warmth settling into his shoulders, smoke catching in the folds of his coat. When they sat to eat, she bowed her head for a moment, lips moving in prayer too quiet for him to hear. He watched her instead. Her hands were cracked from cold, red along the knuckles. Her face was still too pale, but her eyes had changed. Less hollow, more alert. The biscuits were flat and dense, the stew watery. Still, he ate every bite. So did she. After, she cleared the plates without being asked. Washed them with melted snow and a square of lye soap. He offered to help. She shook her head. "I'm used to work," she said. He believed her. Upstairs, the bedroom door shut with a soft click. Levi sat alone by the fire, the heat just beginning to push the chill from his bones. He watched the flames move, thinking how strange it was, having someone in the house again, not a wife. Not yet. They hadn't spoken of it. No one had witnessed vows or signed papers. She hadn't come for love, and yet she had come. The next morning, she was already outside when he stepped onto the porch. The cold slapped his face, but she stood straight, shoulders squared, breath fogging the air. "I want to see the stock," she said. He blinked. "It's below zero. Cattle don't care." She walked ahead of him toward the barn, her boots punching through the crusted snow. He followed, both impressed and bewildered. Most men wouldn't have bothered. Inside the barn, the animals stirred, lowing at the scent of humans and the promise of feed. She didn't flinch at the smell or the filth, just moved with steady hands, helping him haul hay, breaking ice in the troughs. She asked few questions but watched everything. How he tied knots, how he checked hooves, how he measured oats. "Where'd you learn this?" he asked, more curious than skeptical. "Nowhere." She shrugged. "Figuring it out. You ever work land before?" She shook her head. "Just kitchens, laundries, some sewing." He nodded slowly. "You learn fast." "Had to," she said. "Starved once. I don't care to again." The way she said it, it wasn't a story. It was a scar. She didn't flinch or frown. Just said it like you'd mention a broken fence. A fact. A thing fixed only by action. After chores, she made coffee thick and black. They drank it in silence. The wind rattled the windows. She sewed by the fire, mending his torn flannel shirt with tight, neat stitches. He watched her hands, the rhythm of them, precise, unwavering. He wanted to ask where she came from, what had sent her west, why she'd chosen this life. But the questions caught in his throat. She wasn't ready. And neither was he. That night, he lay in bed listening to the wind cry through the eaves. A floorboard creaked above her steps, slow and even. No sounds of weeping, no restless pacing, just quiet motion, the kind that said she meant to stay. Outside, the sky cleared. The moon cast silver over the fields, and the snow shone like glass. For the first time in months, the ranch didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like something waiting to be lived in again. The thaw came slow. Days passed where the sun showed itself only as a dull smear behind the cloud. But one morning the wind lost its bite and the snow began to soften, pulling back from the earth in dirty patches. Beneath it, the ground steamed like something waking up. Levi found her out by the fence line, sleeves rolled again, pulling loose barbed wire from a rotted post. She had no gloves. Her fingers were red and raw, but steady. "You'll ruin your hands," he said. She didn't look up. Hands grow back stronger. He stepped forward, took the wire from her and tossed it to the side. "Come on. You don't need to bleed to prove you belong here." She straightened, back stiff. Her hair had come loose in the wind. A few strands stuck to her mouth. "Don't I?" she asked. He didn't answer, just walked the line in silence until he reached the next post. He felt her eyes on his back. After a moment, she joined him, this time letting him hold the wire while she hammered it in place. They worked like that for hours. No talking, just rhythm. The give and pull of labor. The strange comfort of shared effort. Sweat rolled down Levi's neck despite the cold. He watched her in small glances, the set of her jaw, the way she adjusted her stance when the ground shifted beneath her boots. This wasn't her world, but she was making it hers. Back at the house, he poured warm water into a basin and set it on the table without a word. She sat and soaked her hands, face unreadable. "You don't have to do everything all at once," he said, quieter now. She looked at him, then really looked at him. If I slow down, I'll remember how much I don't belong. Levi felt something catch in his chest. Not pity, something deeper, a kind of recognition. You belong more than most. She gave a half smile, not quite trust, not quite disbelief. You don't know me, he nodded. Not yet. And that was the first moment they softened toward each other. Not love, not even comfort, just a pause in the wind. A place where something could grow. In the weeks that followed, they settled into a rhythm. She baked, patched the roof, helped birth a calf in the dark mud of the barn. He showed her where the wild plums grew in spring, how to set snares for rabbits, how to read the sky. He told her stories over supper, not many, not deep ones. Just tales about the land, the time the river had flooded and taken the old bridge, or how his father once shot at a tornado out of sheer spite. She laughed at that, a quiet, surprised sound that warmed the room more than the fire. She spoke less, but listened with an intensity that made him feel like his words mattered. And slowly, pieces of her past slipped out. An orphanage near Raleigh, a job in a textile mill where the air was thick with cotton dust, a man who promised marriage, then vanished with her savings. $3, she said one night. That's all I was worth, I suppose. Levi shook his head. Number. That's just the price of escape. She blinked at him, caught off guard. He didn't press, just refilled her coffee and let the silence settle soft around them. The snow melted into rivers that cut through the pasture. Calves were born, weak-legged and soft-eyed. The house smelled of soap and bread. She planted a small garden behind the barn, knees deep in soil, dirt streaking her cheek like war paint. One evening, he found her standing in the doorway of the barn, watching the horizon burn orange and red. He stepped beside her, close enough to feel her shoulder brush his. You thinking of going back east? He asked. She shook her head. There's nothing there but hunger. He nodded. There's not much here either. She turned to him. There's enough. They stood like that, side by side, the light fading, the sky swallowing the sun. A hawk wheeled overhead, its cry sharp against the quiet. She reached for his hand. Not as a lover, not yet, but as someone choosing to stay. And Levi, who had once buried his heart with Eliza under a cottonwood tree, let himself hope that maybe not everything buried stayed dead. The letter came in early May, stuffed between a seed catalog and a bill for feed he hadn't paid yet. The envelope was thick and clean, the handwriting narrow and slanted, like it had been written by someone with something to prove. Levi read it on the porch while the sun still hung low, Miriam inside boiling laundry. He read it once, then again, then set it down like it might burn through the boards beneath his boots. She came out with a basin of wet clothes in her arms, saw his face. What is it? He didn't answer right away, just stood there, jaw set, eyes somewhere beyond the hills. It's from my brother. Her hand stilled. You never mentioned a brother. Don't mention a lot of things. He passed her the letter. She dried her fingers on her apron before taking it, reading it slow. When she finished, she held it out like it had grown thorns. He wants to buy the ranch. Levi nodded once. Says he heard I was still alone. Figures I might want out. Do you? He didn't answer. That night, the quiet between them was sharp as broken glass. He sat by the fire, boots off, mind miles away. She sat across from him, needle moving in and out of fabric, though her hands trembled just enough to keep the stitches crooked. Finally she spoke. You thinking of selling? He looked at her, really looked. This land's been in my family since before the war. Pa died working it. Eliza's bones are buried here. She set the needle down. But that's not a no. He leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. I was alone when I got that letter. Thought maybe it'd be easier to let it go. And now? I don't know, he said. You came. Silence stretched again, long and brittle. I didn't come for land, Levi, or to be your next grave. He flinched, like she'd slapped him, but she didn't apologize. Just stood and left the room, her footsteps soft but final. He sat alone, the fire low, the wind pushing at the shutters like it wanted in. 3 days passed. She spoke little, worked hard. The house felt colder again, though the days were warmer now. The birds had returned, flitting around the eaves, building nests from twine and horsehair. Levi went into town for supplies. When he came back, she wasn't in the house. He found her near the tree line, kneeling by a small patch of wildflowers. She didn't hear him at first. When she turned, her face was wet, her hands dirty. "I used to plant flowers with my mother," she said, voice low. "Before the fever took her." He said nothing, just stood there in his worn boots, hands in his pockets. "I don't want to live in someone else's memory," she said. "I want to build something of my own." He stepped forward. "Then build it here." She stood slowly, brushing her hands against her skirt. "You sure?" He took a breath. "I'll tell my brother to go to hell." And she smiled then, tired and real, like it had cost her something. But it was worth it. The following week, they painted the barn. Not red, it hadn't been red in decades, but a warm gray that matched the dust and the sky. They mended fence posts, drove into town together for feed, and bought a piglet for the pen she'd cleared herself. One morning, she came in from the garden holding a blue egg and a smile. "Hens finally laid," she said, holding it out like a gift. He reached for it, their fingers touching for just a second, longer than necessary. That night he brought out a ring. Nothing fancy his mother's, a gold band worn thin by time and dishwater. He set it on the table, not making a speech. Just looked at her and said, "I want to start something, not just finish what came before." She picked it up, turned it in her fingers. "You want a wedding?" He shrugged. "I want you." She slid the ring on, quiet, then nodded. And that was all. Weeks later, they stood before the preacher in the chapel with wood-pewed silence, and only the ranch hands and the storekeeper's wife as witnesses. She wore a dress she'd sewn herself, simple and soft. He wore the only clean shirt he had. When they kissed, it was not the kiss of strangers who'd been forced into something. It was a vow made flesh. The summer settled in slow and wide, like a warm hand over the land. The soil dried and cracked in places. But Miriam's garden pushed through anyway, green beans, carrots, squash curling on the vine. She watered them in the evening, bonnet low, arms streaked with dirt and sweat. Levi would watch from the porch sometimes, nursing coffee gone cold, and wonder how a woman so quiet could shift the whole shape of his life, not with declarations, not with fire, but with hands that kept moving, a heart that kept choosing to stay. She didn't speak often of her past, and he didn't ask. But every now and then her guard slipped a story told offhand while chopping vegetables, or a name muttered in sleep. Each one made him ache, not from pity, but from respect. Whatever had happened before she stepped off that train, she had clawed her way out of it. She belonged to no one's history but her own now. Late July, the trouble came. It rode in with the dust-tall man, city boots, waxed mustache, a suit too fine for this part of the country. He stepped into the general store while Levi and Miriam were loading sacks of flour into the wagon. The man tipped his hat. "Mrs. Dunn?" She stiffened, her hands frozen around the sack. Levi stepped in front of her without thinking. "Who's asking?" The man smiled, sharp and slow. "Name's Everett Caldwell, legal representative. Here on behalf of Mrs. Miriam Hatcher's estate." Her name landed like a slap in the air. Miriam didn't flinch, but her eyes went flat. "I'm not a Hatcher anymore," she said. Caldwell gave a little bow. "Apologies. Still, the matter's pressing. Your father passed 2 months ago. There's property, a claim being contested by some distant cousin in Charleston. But the will is clear. It names you sole heir." Silence. Levi looked at her. She was stone still, face unreadable. "How much land?" he asked. 200 acres. "And a house." The man handed her a document. She didn't take it. "I left that life," she said. "I left it for a reason." "Which is exactly why I'm here," Caldwell said smoothly. "You can sell it, keep it, burn it, for all I care. But it's yours, and it's waiting." He tipped his hat again, passed the envelope to Levi, and walked back into the dust, leaving behind the kind of quiet that tastes like blood in the mouth. That night, she sat by the window, the paper untouched on the table beside her. "Do you want it?" Levi asked. She shook her head. "I want peace. But it's your family's land. They never treated it like that, not when I was there." He crossed the room, stood behind her. "You could sell it, use the money for the ranch, or anything you want." She didn't speak for a long while. Then, "If I go back, I might not come back here." He swallowed hard. "You wouldn't go alone." That made her turn. "You'd come with me?" "I'd follow you through fire, Miriam." She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "Even if I don't come back?" He shook his head. "I don't care where we are, as long as we're together." Her face broke then not into a smile, but into something softer, sadder. She pressed her hand to his chest, over his heartbeat, and nodded once. They traveled east at the end of the season, leaving the ranch in the care of Levi's friend, Jed. The train rolled through dry plains and into hills, the trees changing shape, the air thickening with green. Charleston was humid, old, and full of ghosts. They signed papers, met with lawyers, stood in a courtroom that smelled of mildew and dust. The cousin never showed. The house was shuttered and dead-eyed, the land overgrown. Miriam walked the boundary lines in silence. When she came back, she said only, "Burn it down or sell it. I don't want it. I just wanted to look it in the eye one last time." Levi kissed her forehead and made the sale himself. They left with money. Enough for animals, tools, a windmill to pump water into the dry far fields. But more than that, they left with her past laid down, like a stone finally set in the right place. Back in Wyoming, the wind was colder. Autumn had begun peeling the trees, but the land welcomed them home like it had been waiting. He built her a greenhouse. She painted the porch, and when she told him, in quiet breath under the stars, that they would need another place setting come spring, he didn't speak. He just wrapped his arms around her, buried his face in her neck, and cried for the first time in years. The winter came harder than the last, but it didn't feel cruel this time. The cold still clawed at the windows, and the snow still buried the fields. But inside the house, the air was alive with warmth, wood smoke, bread rising, and her laughter rare and low, like a creek that had just begun to thaw. Miriam moved slower now, one hand often resting on the soft curve of her belly. Her skin had changed, too less pale, touched by sun and wind, toughened by work, yet glowing with something quieter than joy. Peace, maybe, or the hard-won version of it. Levi kept close to her, watching her hands, listening to her breath, like a man afraid to wake from a dream. He built a cradle from pine and iron nails, each stroke of the plane deliberate. When he finished, she ran her fingers along the rails, then kissed him without a word. They didn't talk much about the child, no names, no futures, but there was understanding in every glance, every shared silence. The house, once a place for ghosts, had become something else entirely. Home, one morning in February, they woke to a banging on the door. Levi opened it to find Jed, red-faced, soaked in snow. "Riders came through last night," he said, catching his breath. "3 of them. Cut fences, scared up half the cattle, took down your east gate." Levi didn't ask who. He knew. The cousin from Charleston had sent word after the sale. Accusations, claims, empty threats that Levi had dismissed. But some grudges had long legs. "I'll ride out," Levi said. "See how bad it is?" "I'll come," Miriam said, already reaching for her coat. "No," he said, too quickly. "You stay." Her eyes narrowed, and for a second, he thought she'd argue. But she nodded instead, pulled her coat tighter, and pressed something small and cold into his palm before he left a silver locket he'd never seen her wear. "For luck," she said. He kissed her knuckles. "I'll be back before sundown." Outside, the wind bit hard. He rode east, where the gate had been torn, where tracks led off into the hills like a challenge. He followed them, rifle slung across his back, jaw tight. It wasn't revenge he was after. It was something quieter. Protection, the kind that came not from blood or law, but from love. By dusk, the wind had died. Smoke curled from the chimney as Levi rode back in. The cattle had been scattered, but recovered. The riders had vanished, probably scared off by the warning shots Jed fired into the dark. Miriam met him on the porch, eyes wide, hands resting on her stomach. "All right?" she asked. He nodded. "All right." And then her knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground, the cold forgotten, the fear sharp in his throat. "Now," she whispered, "it's time." The birth came fast, too fast. The midwife hadn't arrived. The fire burned low. The wind moaned around the house like it knew something he didn't. But Miriam didn't scream. She gritted her teeth, dug her fingers into the blanket, and bore down with the kind of strength that didn't come from muscle. It came from survival. Hours passed in a blur of heat and prayer. And then, a cry thin, high, and alive. A daughter. Levi held her in his arms, stunned by her weight, her tiny fists, her red, wrinkled face. Miriam, pale and trembling, watched with eyes full of something he'd never seen before, not just love. "Victory, you did it," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "We did." They named her Eliza Ruth, after the past and the future. The name fit her soft and fierce, all at once. Spring came late that year, but when it did, it brought color with it. Wildflowers spread like spilled paint across the hills. The garden bloomed early, the calves were strong, and on a warm morning in April, Levi placed a hand on Miriam's shoulder as she rocked the child to sleep. He pressed a small wooden carving into her palm, a sparrow. "I made it," he said, "to carry with her, so she remembers where she comes from." Miriam looked down at it, eyes bright. "She won't forget." He looked out the window where the light spilled over the fields, touching everything gold. "Neither will we." The house was quiet. The wind had gentled, and in that stillness, the future opened like a gate left unlatched wide and waiting.